So thank you guys for joining us today. So today we have a treat for you guys. Zach Bowders is a prominent member of the Tableau community, serving as Tableau ambassador and a Tableau visionary. His eye-catching visualizations on Tableau Public have earned him Viz of the Day 13 different times. So Zach works at JLL as a business intelligence director, and today he's going to talk about storytelling and templates. And we're very lucky to have him because he drove all the way from Memphis just to be here with us today. So thank you, Zach.
Who here is this their first time attending the Tableau user group, or is everyone a veteran at this point? Hey, welcome. Thanks for coming. I attended a tech meetup in Memphis last time. That was my first time attending it. It was not a data visualization tug. It was a designer tug. I'm trying to put a lot more thought and intent into design lately because I think UI is something that we as data analysts often neglect, because I think it's very easy to become an afterthought because we're so concerned about making charts that represent what we've been asked to do that many times we don't think about the ergonomics and flow that people that design websites or other things might do. So as I pitched this is called storytelling and templates. That's what I told Jessica at the time because I had no better suggestion of what to call this. I presented different versions of this a few times, including at the Nashville Tableau user group previously, but maybe a better name for it would be make good stuff faster. So many times, when we're working on creating stuff for work or for personal projects, we spend a lot of time working on the minutia and the repetitive stuff that is the least fun and most obnoxious to work on. And this is my antidote for that. I'm Zach Bowders. I'm a 5-time Tableau visionary, one of their 50 or so best recognized users in the world. I'm also a 5-time Tableau ambassador, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying a Tableau influencer, which yuck. I also have 275 plus Tableau public data visualizations that I have done for absolutely free. Why, I don't know, but I was having fun at the time, and 13 of those have won Viz of the Day awards. I have won 2 Tableau Community Vizzy Awards, which means people in the community recognize stuff I was doing. And I also host the Data Plus Love podcast, which you can hear Jessica on. So here is a snapshot of those 13 visits of the day. They are varied. Some of them are very weird. A lot of them are pop culture based. And listening to me a minute ago, you're probably like, wait, you've done 275 or more public data visualizations for free. What is wrong? Why are you doing that? And I think my answer that it seemed like a good idea at the time, but I think it's because I love charts and I love exploring data and I love learning things. And also I find topics and ways of exploring data that keeps me engaged and interested. And as a result of this, that's really facilitated my learning and gotten me going. So here's some of my weird charts. This is one I actually spoke at for Walt Disney 6 months ago. And I asked the person there, is it okay if I use this one as one of my examples? Like, oh, you have to use that one as one of your examples. So Disney kills parents like a lot more than reality. So if you look at some of the text at the top, it's describing the actual loss rates for mothers and fathers versus in Disney movies, especially among Disney princesses, which is way, way higher. They're getting a little better about it in more recent movies, but they're particularly bloodthirsty with parental figures. And this is a nice way of encoding that, showing for each princess 1 year's father, 1 year's mother. You flip the color if they didn't make it. This is one I did recently representing over 20,000 plus man-made objects launched into space. I figured it's appropriate for here. So the rings going outward from Earth to the very exterior represent the date that these objects were launched. And you can see Sputnik towards the innermost circle. You can also see the line chart in the upper left corner, which passes up through the title, showing that until like the 2000s, the USSR was way ahead of the US in terms of the sheer volume of these things that they had put into orbit. They went defunct a while back, but Russia obviously picked up the slack, being the same land mass and government and that sort of thing. But in more recent years, the US has really picked up, which you can see with that purple ring really saturating on the outer areas. In fact, USS, USSR, China, Russian Federation, United Kingdom are the 5 largest entities in terms of governmental figures that are associated with these, with all of the other in this data set representing only about 12%. It's a really fun data set. It's out on Kaggle. I highly recommend looking at it. It's apropos to where we are right now. And then also, the second Wicked movie is coming out soon, and my oldest daughter is 14 and refuses to stop talking about it. But during the interviews for the first Wicked movie, among the awkward finger holding and stuff like that, there was a moment at which the two interviewees, Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, nearly burst into tears when the reviewer talked about how people were holding space with their performances. And I asked my wife, like, have you ever heard this expression before in your life, holding space? And she's like, well, I think it means this. Like, no, 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 not what you think it means. Have you used this? Have you heard anyone say? She's like, no. So I use Google Trends, which is an amazing tool for looking up search histories, to look at, for a certain time period, searches for the expression holding space. And you can see that on November 22nd, when that interview took place, you see a huge spike in searches for holding space, because I'm assuming people like me had not heard of this before. But then later you see a second spike, maybe a couple weeks later on December 6th, which is a follow-up interview promoting this movie also, where both Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo said, no, we had no idea what holding space meant. We just thought that sounded important and we just kind of went with it. So if you go and look that up on my Tableau public, you can also click and see the YouTube links. This is the weird stuff, guys, but some of my stuff is more typical too. So that was to get your attention with some stupid razzle dazzle. And this is why you should listen to anything I say after this. So this is a map I made of Disneyland. I actually had to geolocate every single one of these ride locations, which was a huge pain, because geolocation codes often don't go down to that level of detail. But this is real data that you can get off of Kaggle representing the typical wait times for these attractions. So I filtered this dashboard to a Wednesday at 2, and you can see which rides are the hottest, which rides have the most time available. And then if you look at the right side of the page, you can actually see over the course of a Tuesday, or Wednesday in this case, which rides are the busiest and when they're the busiest, much like if you go on like Google Maps and you're looking to know when to go get that burrito or something. Like, you don't go at peak hours, you go to off hours. This is an example using one of my templates that I made last year when I was looking at a job at Starbucks. They ghosted me during the process and laid off a ton of people at that time. So I don't really regret that they didn't follow up with me. But you can actually create some really interesting tools in Tableau, like overlays for your dashboard, like this right now, which can help facilitate the use and learning of your users while they're using your product. So the temptation many times is, well, I need to create some documentation to help people figure out what's going on here, or I have an important note I want to make about this thing. I'm going to put that in Confluence or somewhere crazy. Here's the secret. They will never look. And I know this because I never go and look either. Okay, so if you wouldn't do it, they're also not going to do it. But if you can think of a way to incorporate it into your dashboard, you can save yourself and your users a lot of heartache. And here's another example where I was looking at a real life news item. Does anyone remember Panera's charged lemonades? Okay, a friend of mine, Mark Bradbourne, a Tableau employee, was a big devotee of these lemonades. These are lemonades that bragged about how much caffeine they had in them. Mind you, none of us actually have a real understanding of caffeine, how much is in stuff, or what that represents. So what I wanted to understand is why 2 people died drinking these lemonades. And as I looked at this, I pulled data from Coca-Cola. I pulled it from coffee companies. I wanted to compare other beverages that people drink typically. And on the top chart, you can see milligrams of caffeine per milliliter. The middle chart shows the recommended serving sizes. And then the bottom chart shows the milligrams of caffeine per serving. If we zoom in on that bottom chart, we can see that in terms of milligrams of caffeine per serving, those drinks were actually at the very top of this drink hierarchy, second only to energy shots. But most people, when they're going to get a fountain drink, especially a lemonade, aren't thinking of things that way. They're not just getting one drink, they're probably getting a refill. And even then, the recommendations for these drinks, you see the little asterisks next to each of those charged beverages. They included their caffeine limits with ice. So even then, it's actually even more caffeine than what they're registering there. Okay, so I got all of the pedigree and stuff, the flashiness out of my system. So now we can actually talk about why we're here, and I feel a sense of closure. Much like closure as Scott McCloud describes it in Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art. So closure is leveraging the perceptions that people have to fill in the blanks. So in this case, when you're looking at that image on the right, all of us recognize those as Pepsi bottles, but none of them say Pepsi. Every single one of them is slightly rotated. What this image is leveraging is our understanding of, we know that Pepsi is a thing, also that objects can be rotated, and we're cobbling together some various pieces of information here to know that that's what it says. But what this is also telling us is that whenever you are creating something, whether it be a drawing of Pepsi bottles or a business dashboard, your viewers are active participants in the process, which is a little bit terrifying, which means that what you're putting on the page is not everything that's there. They're bringing their own understandings, perceptions, and expectations to it as well. So going back to Disney, I kept this in from the Disney version of this deck. Does anyone see Mickey Mouse in this picture? Because I do. This is from Disney's Hollywood Studios. They actually laid out part of the park, so it's a giant hidden Mickey from the air. That's leveraging closure because you in your head have an image of what Mickey Mouse's face looks like. So we can't speak directly with the audience very often. Now, there's some ways that you can, but for a lot of your users, you're creating a business dashboard, you're putting it out there, and then they're going to come and use it, and you can't sit there with them. You know, you may get a chance to demo it. You might be able to put together some literature to help them. But really, you and your audience are in different corners here, and that data visualization is in the middle. So things like templates, closure, and leveraging the expectations and understandings of your users can really be valuable tools into making better products. So understanding closure is understanding your audience. A few years ago at the Tableau conference, I attended a session by Chantilly Jaggernoff. She's in the Tableau Visionary Hall of Fame. She's really impressive. She did a talk called Design Secrets for the Non-Designer. And one of the core aspects of this presentation was use of templates. And at the time, I had never used one. I had never made one, but I found it incredibly illuminating. In fact, the whole room did. She spoke to a room roughly 5 times this size that was packed to capacity. And at the end of it, I'm not exaggerating here when I say people rushed the stage like she was Mick Jagger. Like there were about 150 people that came to the front because they had questions, they wanted follow-ups, because what she had just presented was so useful to them that they knew it was going to make a difference in how they work. So some of the benefits of templates, and we're going to get into some examples of what's useful in them, how to create them, and I'm also going to provide you with a couple that you can walk away with and do anything you want. They're going to reduce time on repetitive, tedious tasks. So one of the things I hate the most is just laying out a page. Like I need to put a header, I need to put a footer. They're going to want me to put filters somewhere. Those kinds of things, the more that you can get them out of your way, the more you can actually focus on the value prospects that you're bringing to the table, which is your analytical ability and storytelling. They decrease decision fatigue. You know, they talk about Mark Zuckerberg, how he would wear the same hoodie every day. Now he's a little more bro-y. Now he's got like the chain and like the V-neck. He switched it up. But he would always wear the same hoodie every day. And he said it was to decrease decision fatigue. I think that's kind of a bunch of BS. But in reality, you have to make so many decisions every day. Why waste them on stuff that's unimportant? They create visual consistency. Not only will your stuff look the same across you and your colleagues, that will be useful for marketing your work, but it'll also be useful for the understanding of your work as your users, when they look from one dashboard to another, find the same kind of elements they're looking for in the same kind of places. And it's also going to increase your speed to market. I had a task at work once where they were asking for a new dashboard, and I was literally able to spin it up in less than 20 minutes because I already had a template where I could just create some charts and slide them into it. And that really just elevated my speed to market like crazy. So this is an example from my Tableau public, 8 different images of, essentially a zine type format I used. I called it the data dump. I created this specifically for the idea of, sometimes I had a little idea that I wanted to explore, but I didn't want to put a whole lot of effort into it. But by creating a template, I could explore the Boston Massacre, which, if you've never heard of it, was back in 1919 when a giant vat of molasses exploded in Boston and flooded the streets. I wanted to look at how much molasses there were, which turns out to be 77 times what you would get in a typical swimming pool, how fast it was going, which is faster than Usain Bolt, and how high it was, which is higher than a 2-story building. Because I know when I was hearing some of these things, I had some thoughts about how I would get out of this, and apparently a lot of them were mistaken. But in creating this template, I was able to explore other things like Superman, John Wick, Cameron Crowe movies. Are they good or not? The answer is yeah. The NBA and where people are shooting from and their success rates. James Bond, and so on, and so on. I did 11 of these. But the fact of the matter is, I was able to create stuff that was consistent in storytelling ability, that was a familiar format, and had all the elements I needed to tell the stories I was looking for. So let's talk about some stuff that works and some stuff that doesn't work when you're creating or using a template. So going back to layout, this is a page from an Uncle Scrooge comic. When you're looking at a page, we're talking about the Western world, because it can vary by region and language. We read left to right and top to bottom. So think of this like you would a business dashboard. You want to lay things out in the order that you want people to read them. So in a template like this, which I've already stocked with charts, people are going to read from the bands in the top to that map, to the scatter plot, to the donut charts, and then eventually to the bars. Whatever story you're trying to tell in the level of granularity, you want to make sure it usually flows from the most summarized to the most granular. In this case, not necessarily, because this is dummy data. This is here specifically to illustrate the flow. But think of it like that Uncle Scrooge comic. When you're laying out the data, top to bottom, left to right. And the same, if you have a dashboard page where you want to do like a left-hand band stack, for example, you're going to have a similar flow where it's top to bottom, left to right. So be aware of that when you're laying stuff out, that you want to put stuff in a sequence that is meaningful and logical. So when I created this template originally, this was my first attempt at creating a template. I created 6 different versions, which was admittedly overkill. But I was like, hey, I want to create some options so that when I'm creating something like that Starbucks dashboard, that I can just throw it out there quickly. But your dashboard template doesn't have to be that complex. Really, it can be whatever you need it to be for whatever you typically find yourself working on. So let's look at some stuff that doesn't work in terms of dashboard layout. Don't put bands on the bottom. Like they're there for summarization. Like they're there to give you your quick hit big idea, and then you're expanding upon that with the other data in the dashboard. So if you put that in the bottom, it's an afterthought. It's not that summary that is providing you with value. Additionally, don't put them on the right side, left to right, top to bottom. Stick to stuff like that. Some elements of templates. So I'm sure someone has created their own taxonomy of how to talk about this stuff, but I'm going to call them 3 different things. And if you have better names for them, like rock that, go with it. But I'm going to call them descriptive elements, viz elements, and interactive elements. So here's some examples of descriptive elements in the template I just showed you. So titles. Make sure to put meaningful titles on anything you're putting out there. Don't assume that people know what they are. Even if this is someone that you're building this with that uses it every day, they will forget, or alternatively, they'll share it with someone else. I used to work at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I was there for 13 years. I remember one time a senior leader, this is someone that made $250,000 a year and had VP next to their name, wanted to talk to me about a dashboard, completely misunderstanding the intent of the dashboard. And it was because on some of the areas, I hadn't put meaningful titles on it. So always make sure to have a title, and if necessary, a subtitle saying over time or by whatever, so that it is very clear what you're showing on the chart. In this case, I also decided to encode the interactivity that you could have with each chart. So that upper right corner where you can see filter, click, click through, and highlight, I used those on every single chart and filled in the shape for where it was active. So you can see some of those charts have filled pink triangles, meaning if you click on that chart, it will filter other charts in the page. None of them have click through or highlight enabled, but for the sake of consistency, much like a stoplight you might see, I wanted to make sure people became familiar with all 3 of these symbols. So I would include them every time, even if it wasn't in use in that particular case. I also wanted to include a footer in the bottom left corner, in this case, to show when it was most recently updated. This is a really useful thing, especially since a lot of people are going to look at your dashboard Download it or take a snapshot of it and throw in a PowerPoint deck. And later they're going to ask you, well, why don't the numbers look like this now? And if you don't know when the data was from, you will never be able to find it out because you don't know which version of the dashboard from what time with which set of data they're showing you. So having something visible to indicate when your data is from is highly useful. Another thing that I bake into all of my dashboards now, and this is kind of my go-to, and I will get into how to make this, and it will also be included in both templates for you to use should you use it, is an overlay. So this question mark, if you click on it, opens a descriptive overlay over top of the dashboard. This one isn't populated, but my next example will be. This is actually a Tableau. It's a chart, but it's an empty chart. And by using annotations, we can create descriptive text that we sit on top of the dashboard that can help explain important things about the usage, important caveats about the data, and other things like that, that we want to travel with the dashboard and be built into it, not just be squirreled away on a SharePoint somewhere. Here's some interactive elements that I like to consider with a dashboard. In the upper right corner, I put my filters menu. So in this particular filters menu, I included one filter, but I also included some things that I thought would be useful, including who created this dashboard and when. And also those symbols for the visual encoding, should someone developing the dashboard need to swap them out and use the filled or unfilled ones. Be very careful about using shapes and images throughout your dashboard. So you see that triangle, circle, and square shape I'm using. None of those are image files. They're all actually ASCII characters. Unicode characters. Unicode characters work great in Tableau dashboards. They look exactly like you want them to. And it doesn't matter who's using it on which machine where. If you are to use image files, sometimes they can scale differently. Sometimes someone opens up their workbook and can't find the image file if they need to edit your dashboard, and things can get lost and get a little squirrely. Now, super duper crazy power users will know that you can unzip a Tableau file, and it's essentially a zip file, and find the images in there. But that's a lot of expectation to put on someone. So designing with empathy, where all of the weird images I have on here, from the question marks to the house to the little arrows and carrots, all of those are Unicode characters because they're really hard to break. I also included some navigation because sometimes dashboards that I have to do at work get socked into a portal somewhere. So instead of driving people to the Tableau server, where they could easily view all the pages and navigate between them, they're only able to see one image, much like Tableau Public. So by creating something like this with a home button and left and right arrows, which we could set up to progress through different sheets, that helped circumvent that problem, and also meant I didn't have to recreate that every time. If I don't need it, I delete it. If I need it, it's already there. And now Viz elements, right? So I said there were 6 different versions of this, but they all contain a lot of the same stuff. I typically include a spot for bands on the top. If you're a fan of the Big Book of Dashboards, Steve Wexler, who's one of the co-authors, says he created the bands. Band stands for big ass numbers. Or if you're going a little harder PG, big angry numbers, big aggregated numbers, whatever you need to call it. But they're the big numbers at the top that say the most summarized things. And then you've got space for charts below. You might not need 4 charts. You might need 3. One might need to be tall. One might need to be long. You can configure that how you need to. But by reserving the space in advance, you know that it's there. And I really wouldn't go much further than this many charts on a page unless you absolutely have to. There will be people that insist. They will swear up and down a stack of Bibles they need 75 charts on a page. And I will tell you, those people that will look at that page once you've delivered it, totally zone out instantly and never use it. And I know this because I've done this. All right. So other considerations I left out because 3 bullet points seemed sufficient when I first wrote that. So dashboard size. Think about what your company typically uses. Those dashboard pages I just created were 1400 by 900, which fits perfectly in a PowerPoint deck, but it doesn't always scale to a laptop screen. So you might want to consider which dimensions to use. Color choices. Be very wary of color. I worked for I supported a large beverage company in Atlanta one time. They liked the color red and thought that should mean good. It should not. Iconography. Icons are great. They can be really useful. They can also be confusing. So don't use them unless it's really clear what they represent. The dashboard I showed you had some icons where it's not clear what they are and what they represent. And I'm going to get into that in my next version. Formatting and layouts. Think about what flows the easiest. And container usage. I have used containers for every single one of these because it's very easy to put your charts inside of them. Think about how you want to do that as well. This is a second version that I created. It's more serene, it's easier to use, and I'm relying a whole lot less on two things. I no longer use color to represent the shapes that indicate interaction because it was unnecessary. I'm paring back the things I don't need. I also added text to the interactivity because previously I used icons and it wasn't always clear what those icons meant. And I want to take as much cognitive load off my end user as I can. So in this version, I have a navigation menu to navigate to whatever page you want. If I don't need it, I just delete it. My overlay comes pre-stocked with some examples of what the overlay can do and how to use it. Because I'd like to be able to hand this to somebody else and say, hey, just go use a page. It has an overlay built in. Add whatever notes you need. And for my filters, pretty much the same thing. It's kind of hard to break filters. But I did use color for those three, which is probably also unnecessary. But just be mindful of that and think about how you're going to use color and don't use color when you don't need to. So both of my templates are available. They're in this workbook. They're on my Tableau public. And also you can click on either of these QR codes and download them. But I want to take the opportunity to open up one of them for you and sort of show you under the hood some of what's going on and how you can use them. No expectation that you take mine and use them. If you do take them and use them, knock yourself out. Change them, use them for work, use them for fun. Don't care. I really have no strong opinion on this. So I'll have this up for just a second, and then I'm going to open the V2 version of the workbook, because I think one of the most useful things that you can do is start thinking about those overlays. Tableau is making some efforts toward incorporating some of that functionality natively, but they're still a ways off. They want to be able to create a documentation stream throughout the dashboard. But this is something that you could do right now that can really make your life a whole lot easier. All right, so now that we've done that, I'm going to switch over. I also want to show you, if you go to my Tableau public, Zach Bowders, I've created a section at the top, dashboard templates. You can download either of them from there. They're fully downloadable. I do not care if you download them and use them again. Okay, so looking at the V2 version of the dashboard, for my layout, you can see I've been very sort of methodical with putting stuff together in different containers and stuff. But you're probably wondering, like, if you've never used a template before, how would you actually develop something in it? So I've connected to a world airports data set. So I have a sample data set in here, which I use to construct the dashboard, because dashboards always have to be connected to something, even if you don't use it. So the Superstore data set has been the foundation of this, but I'm not using it anywhere in the dashboard. There's no real data in it. But having connected to world airports, I'm going to make a chart or two, plug them in, and then we're going to look at how we can use things like our filter menu and our overlay to help facilitate stuff. So having used this airport data set before, I know that there is a type section. So I'd like to be, actually, you know what? Let's do content. So we have different airports across continent. This is a really cool data set, by the way. This is where I discovered that there was a ring of early alert radar stations across the top of Canada from the Cold War in case Russia decided to come over the North Pole. They're still there, and they all have airfields in them, which is why they're in this data set. That's pretty cool. So let's look at that. So we have our abbreviations for continents, and let's add our count of airports. So I'm going to stretch this entire view. I'm going to hide that. I'm going to give this a meaningful name. That's one of the nicest things you can do for yourself, by the way. And also learn how to spell continents. That's fine. That's good enough. All right. So if I wanted to include that over here, if you go to dashboard, you can see your band continent and just drag it in. In this case, oftentimes we typically might not include a title on a band If it's very clear in this case, it might not be clear because they're abbreviated. So I'm going to allow that and maybe give it a better name. Airports per continent. Let's go ahead and create one or two more charts quickly so you can see how easy it is to sort of slide them into your different spots. And also some of the weird things that can happen when you add them to your different spots, which you might be familiar with. So let's go to longitude and latitude and see if that messes me up, as this data set sometimes does. So world airports. We are going to look at latitude, longitude, add ID. And that didn't do anything because that's not the right field. Do name. See, I told you it was going to mess me up. So here we go. The correct longitude and latitude fields. There we go. And that's a whole lot of nonsense you're seeing. And then just for fun, we're going to put type on there for color. You're going to see a whole lot of closed airports. It's staggering the number of closed airports there are around the world. So going to shrink the size down a little bit. Going to add a little bit of opacity. In the perfect world, I would change the color, but this is really a functionality demo. So now I'm going to say airports by type. We're going to add that over here. And you'll see that we had this pop up over here with the key. So it's oftentimes going to try to pop to whatever container it thinks is most logical. You have some discretion over that. Also, you have a filter menu here. So if you decide to add filters, pop it open. And let's add a filter on here for, let's do continent. Filter, include all. Now when I go here, I've got this open. So I'm going to say, filters, continent. And it didn't pop up where I wanted it anyway. So it's fine. See, this is where you can store your different filters. You can make them a multi-value dropdown, and you have a nice storage container where you can tuck them away or include them when you need them. But my favorite thing about using a template is the overlay. So let's say I want to make some comments on here to help explain something about this dashboard. The way this is actually working, and I'm going to remove some of these and show you, is this is a fake chart. So it's a chart where the only source of data is the average of 1. I then made the background transparent, and I added that purplish transparency to it, to the container that it's inside, and I used a collapsible container so that when we can open and close it, that transparent object appears over the rest of the dashboard. Let's say I would like to make a comment about this map. What I can do is I can right-click on my object here. I can go to point. I'm going to say, map colors are garish and unhelpful, because I didn't feel like putting in the effort to choose good map colors right now. So for whatever reason, I wanted to include this in my dashboard whenever people go here. So you actually have more capabilities in formatting for annotations on a dashboard object than anywhere else in Tableau. It's kind of silly. But if you go to formatting, you can actually create a 4-sided object, meaning it's an actual box, or it can be a single-sided object where only one side of the box has an edge. I don't know why it's one-sided because it's still a box. But it's also the only place in Tableau currently where you can use rounded corners. Why? I don't know. You would think you could do that anywhere else because that is a big thing in modern UI design that people really like. But that was not something they included. So in this case, I'm going to add those corners. You can add a border around it. And in many cases, you might want to include a color that stands out to help. And you can add additionally shading and transparency to it. So in this case, hey, map colors are garish and unhelpful. Another thing you can do, like the example that it originally opened on, you can have arrows that point to specific things on the dashboard, which is useful if you're trying to direct the eye to a specific spot instead of just sitting in an area and sort of saturate that with text. So while this is on the map, that's good. But what I could do is I could also do a line right here. I can add this line. Let's make it kind of thick. Let's add an arrow on it and let's make the N bigger. It's pointing to North America. Let's change our note now to be like, North America seems to have a lot. Maybe it needs its own chart. So by doing this, now we have the ability to have notes that sit within our dashboard, which is really, really helpful, particularly some of the projects I've done at work, where, for example, you have sensitive data that not every user can see. So they might open a dashboard and something will not populate for them. You also might have data that's wildly out of date or inconsistent. The company knows it, but it might not be something you can do about right now. So having these notes that are baked in, and you could use different coloring codings depending on how your company wants to do it. If there's a warning, put it in red, that sort of thing. But this is a great way that you can bake in a lot of know-how into your dashboard without you always having to be there and sit and hold people's hands. Because going back to that idea of closure, we don't get to communicate directly with our users. We have to do that through the dashboard. So in this case, using objects like this, creating an overlay, will allow you to provide a lot more direct conversation between you and your end user. So we have about 15 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions or comments or want to throw anything at me? Oh, really hard. Yes. Yeah. Sure. First off, start off with the understanding that sometimes you're just going to lose. So start off with that, because sometimes you'll receive a requirement and that's the requirement and you're going to do exactly that. Don't take it personally. Don't feel defeated if they don't love it. That's what they asked for and that's what they demanded. Oftentimes, if someone asks for something and I have a better idea, I will still make the thing they want and I will make an alternative and say, I know you were asking for a donut chart for this, but considering we're looking at 50 different categories, I found it a little hard to understand, what was the biggest, what was the smallest. So what I created was this also, where now we have a horizontal bar chart that goes from greatest to least, and you can look through that and easily see the relative size of each of them. So what I'll do is if I have an idea that's an alternative, I'll still give them what they want and also show them a different alternative and say, this might be something that's useful. It's also useful to have things, let me pop this open real quick, if none of you are familiar with Andy Kriebel's visual vocabulary, it has over 4 million views on Tableau Public at this point. This thing is a really powerful tool to have in your pocket, particularly when you're having discussions with stakeholders. When I worked in an office, I work fully remote now. I used to have pages of this at the end of my cubicle, and it was really useful for having conversations with people, because sometimes you'll get that ask and they'll say, I need a pie chart that says this. And our role as the analyst, part of it is to execute, but another part of it is to interpret and understand. And it's to understand that they're not literally asking for a pie chart. They're not an expert in data. What they're asking for is an understanding of the parts to a whole relationship of this thing. They just don't understand that there might be different or better ways to do that in some cases. And also, sometimes a pie chart's the correct answer. But I would suggest having some tools like the visual vocabulary where you can have those discussions and stuff, and also understanding, so here's parts to whole, because I keep mentioning pie charts. There's a lot of different ways to represent it. Just for the average person, they know 3 charts. They know a pie chart, a bar chart, and a line chart. And when they ask for something, they believe that they're doing us a favor by specifically saying, create an X that does Y. But our role is to really say, what are you trying to understand? What decision are you trying to make? At the end of the day, what are you needing to execute on and what information do you need to understand that? And when we both parties understand that, then that's when we create really highly effective products. Yeah. Sure. Anybody else? It's okay if you don't. I'm not hurt. Yes. Yeah, you can do that too. I mean, really, it's an opportunity to create essentially a semi-permanent note that's native to Tableau. So a lot of previous ways that people would attempt to do overlays, they would go into, they would create a image of their dashboard page, export it to PowerPoint, draw all the objects they want on top of that image, save those objects as a transparent PNG, load that transparent PNG into a collapsible container in Tableau, and then hope it all aligns correctly. And I know because I've done this. but it never quite aligns correctly. And then they want to change later and you can't find your PowerPoint. And you're frustrated because you're kind of back at the same place you were when you're trying to store this information elsewhere. But while it's not a one size fits all and it can't answer every question, by having a way to do that directly inside of Tableau, it really saves you from a lot of that back and forth hassle because it's all occurring natively inside the tool. So yeah, whatever you need to use it for. Like if it's something that's in development or there's stuff like that that needs to be commented on or back and forth. Like if I'm doing a working session with somebody and they have some comments about some stuff, hey, could we change this? Could we do that? I'll pop open the overlay and make the notes in there and save it. And then when I come back to revisit it that afternoon or something, all my notes are right there and I can act on it. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir. So like concerns about consistency, about how stuff's not looking the same, or yeah. At a corporate level, the division I used to be a part of had some very rigorous standards. So that was kind of self-fulfilling because they had their own vision of how to execute and everything. In the current way I operate, it's less so. So really, I'm sort of developing this as I go. So the answer is when you have a clear vision and a leader that's from the top is saying, hey, this is where we're going, it can be useful because it can be leveraged to say, hey, I understand you would like me to put 75 charts on this page, but I'm not allowed to put 75 charts on this page. Let's talk turkey. What can we do? On the other hand, when you have like one particular vision at the top, if there needs to be flexibility within that vision and the person that's operating it might be more dogmatic or might, feel very locked in, then you might need more latitude at times. So it's really, you really need to both have a vision for how to execute it, as well as the flexibility to bend when you need to. So like if the client says, hey, look, we gotta have our corporate colors in here. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes it's not okay. So you wanna make sure that you're bending in the right direction and not necessarily in the wrong direction. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I would say the template's a starting place and not necessarily a destination. But at the very least, by having a familiar layout, by putting some of those tools like the dates and the filters and stuff like that in familiar places, at the very least, it means when they pop open the workbook, they know where to look. Because I can testify, I work for a Fortune 100 company. I one time had a client email my CEO with the subject line, another embarrassing failure, specifically because he had forgotten where the filter menu was and we hadn't indicated it clearly enough. Like he believed that the dashboard could not be filtered. So you want to make sure that you're creating that familiarity and building that confidence so that when they open it, stuff like that's not even a thought. They're not worrying about how do I use it, because that's what a lot of users are worried about. They don't know how to use it. They're scared. It's like when you open that endless Excel document that we've all opened and you have that panic attack because you see it's, 50 rows long and 10 million rows tall, and someone told you to figure something out from this. That's how a lot of people think of data, and that's how they feel when they interact with it. So we want to break down as many barriers to that as we can so that they feel confident and comfortable to sort of execute on discovery and learning when they use your dashboard. Anybody else? Going once? Wonderful. Yes. Why did I decide to start a podcast? I enjoyed going to the Tableau conference and having conversations with folks like us. I enjoyed having dinner, talking about the stresses we were having, the victories, stuff like that. And I realized I didn't get as much of that as I wanted throughout the year. And I realized if I started a podcast, greedily, I could have those conversations every 2 weeks. So since then, I'm now in my 6th year of doing it bi-weekly. I've had many folks on, some in this room. I've also had, the CEO of Salesforce. I've had a lot of people on. I'm a very small podcast, very niche, but very, very fun. Have a good time. But yeah, that's why I did it for me. Anybody else? You got another? Go for it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's dashboard lag is one of the biggest things, right? One thing, having too much data in a dashboard, right? Like people will ask for the moon. I once had a dashboard where someone had requested over 100 million lines of transactional data. They wanted it at a line item level. They didn't know where this dashboard was going when we first asked for it. They said that's what they needed. By the time we finally had it in a final delivery format, the data had been aggregated. We weren't representing it at that level, but we had built it on top of transactional one line item at a time across 5+ years. So it was extremely slow. I went out of town for a week. One of my coworkers rebuilt it. It was a fraction of the size and ran really fast. And they asked, why couldn't you do it like that in the beginning? It's like, because you didn't know what you wanted in the beginning, right? We were creating as we were going rather than doing that. So aggregating your data, making sure that you're not representing it at the most granular level if you don't need to. Not going crazy with filters. Like, people will ask for every filter under the sun. Do they really need every filter under the sun? That can be really slow. Scatter plots and stuff like that, where you're trying to map out all these different points. Going back to one of my dashboards when I was doing the data dump series, where I was showing you all those different dashboards that look the same. One of those was NBA shot data, and there was a court at the bottom of that. That Tableau public dashboard takes forever to render because it's representing like millions of shots taken in games around the top of the key. And it's actual real data, so it takes forever. If you can find a way to aggregate stuff like that, so you're not representing every single shot, or at the very least, filtering it to a smaller subset of data or something, so you're not putting all that out there. Also, remember that things like tooltips and stuff like that also factor in and take a toll too. So all of those things, try to shrink your stuff down, try to have earnest conversations about not putting 75 filters in the dashboard, because people will ask for everything. Like, it's like when you're buying a car and you're looking at the option list, you want every single option, but like, did you need every single option? Probably not. You might need, half of them, or you might like to have some of them, but is it really going to impact your experience? And also, how often are you going to use that feature? Or is it really just a nice to have, where you're trying to anticipate some future scenario that may or may not ever happen? So yeah, first steps. Anybody else? All right. Thanks for having me, everybody. I really appreciate you coming out today. You want to close out? Yeah. Yes. Oh, you want the... Okay, so if you would like the templates, now that I've destroyed everything, you can go to Tableau Public and look up Zach Bowders. You can use these QR codes or however else you would like to do it. And yeah, well, 55 minutes. And I'm going to hang out for a while if anyone wants to ask any other questions. So thanks, everybody.
So if you guys want to join and help lead a tug, if you want to speak, if you know a potential speaker who would love to speak, reach out to Jessica or John, since I will be heading off to Colorado soon. So thank you so much for coming, and we look to have you at our next one as well. Thanks.